Okay, so let's see the practical application we are going to develop now.
So if I run this now, if I put admin, I know admin, I have programmed it now. So if I put admin, right? Awesome guys, awesome. So it's going to the admin page, so close. If I put a normal user, say ABC, right? And if I say the normal user, if I give a wrong password, wonderful, invalid username password. If I put the right password for a normal user, awesome guys, normal user
Okay, so let's continue to develop this application now.
perform on validation. So I got the logic class, right? So what the logic class does is the logic class will connect it through now to, to do the login validation. Now it needs data, right? It needs to perform on data. So then to perform on data, you don't directly touch the adapters. That is the best practice and the design pattern. So look at our previous video, 5A, to understand that. So what you have to do now is you will be creating the DAO classes, right? So you will have user DAO, because the user table, you have the user DAO classes. Once again, you got the interface and the class, right? So I'll create the interface. Let us say user table, right? So user DAO, data access object, user DAO, right? Data access object, DAO class, the interface, right? And then the corresponding class, right? So class, you'll get the implementation, IMPL, DAO implementation, right? So once again, very important to make them public, otherwise you will not be able to access them from outside, just in case if you want to access them from outside, right? Okay, so and if you think you are not going to access them from outside, right, then you don't need to make them public. You can just keep it like this. Let's see how it goes, right? So let's keep it without making public, because if I need to access it only from within the class, you don't need to make it public, right? So but the logic I have to make public, because the logic will be accessed from outside package, the project, right, controller. Okay guys, so I got the DAO, and what should the DAO have? Now the DAO is the one which will get connected to the database. And now I have connected my database, that relevant table, into this data set, into this give me a sec, let's click on this, into this data table, right? So what should happen now is the DAO, okay, this DAO should connect to this data set, to this data table. That's the theory, right? And then the DAO should make sure to connect to the database and get the data for the validation. So for validation, I need to get the data, right? The username. I need to see whether the username and the password is correct. One more important thing. Now, where's the username and the password? It's over here, right? So this text box 1 and text box 2. So when you click login, now let's make the chain. Let's make the connection, right? So the login will have to pass this username and password into the controller, right? So the controller should receive the parameters, the two parameters, say string username and the string password, because that data is in the view. So that should be coming as parameters into the controller. Then because the controller is going to call the logic in the model, so the logic should also, if you look at the logic, right, should also have the receiving these parameters. That's very important, right? So okay guys, so okay, awesome my friends, awesome. So now we have made the connection. So now if you get, now assume you get the username and the password through parameters to the logic. So the logic will have to pass it to the DAO. So in the DAO, you need to have you need to retrieve the data from the database. So in the DAO, I need to have, let us say, a method. Where's my DAO, right? To validate, but I will not call it as validate user login, because that's validate user login is like the business method you want to perform, right? So if you look at this, it's a business method, but the DAO, I look as if DAO is retrieving the data from the database, right? So when it comes to DAO, I will not give the same name, rather I will give a different name, like instead of to validate user login, I need to get the user, right? So I need to see whether the user is there in the database. So I will use some name like if I say something like void something like get user, right? I get user by, I'm just giving, like I can give any name by say username and password, something like this. So in the DAO I'm talking in terms of data, like okay, so like get user, right? And then I will use this for the validation, right? So get user, right? Get the user, right? So that means that's, so you talk in data terms in the DAO. So in the DAO implementation you will implement this method, right? You will implement this method, right? Now this DAO, this is the final step. Now this is where you get connected to database. We'll have to talk to this data set, that is the theory, and look at our previous videos if you can't understand that. So now what you have to do is you have to make a SQL, because at the moment there's a method but it doesn't validation. So you have to create a new method, and inside that you have to have a query. So what you do is right click on the table adapter, say add query, right? And then you have to select the use select. So if you don't know about, if you can't understand, look at our previous videos about explaining this stuff. But what you have to do now is just say use this select, right? And then you will have to say query builder. It's easy, query builder. Then you will see that table because you have connected this table. So over here you can do write to SQL for validation. So for validation, username password, you will put a where clause where the username is equal to incoming username, meaning at username. So this is how you do it, right? This is how you receive a data parameter into the query when you deal with data sets. And then the password should be equal to at password. So this tells that you are receiving this as parameters from outside into this query, right? That's true because the data comes from the view, right? So, and you can execute the query and see whether it works. So if you remember, I had username ABC and password 123, right? So if I put that, I should receive that data. If it's correct, I should receive that username and password, the other data like the user ID and the user level. See, I'm receiving it, right? So user ID 123 and the user level is 1. So I know that. But for example, if I give a wrong password, say if I say 12345 something like that, I don't have the password for ABC, right? This is wrong. I should get a null. So the idea is if the user enters a wrong username and a password, the data retrieved is null. Null means there's no data. So this is how you find out whether it's a valid username or password. If you receive a series of null, which means either the username or the password is wrong. So but if you receive one row, it means the username and the password is correct. So that is how you do the validation, right? So just for your information. So now I'm happy with this, so I will click OK, then I'll click next, right? And then this will so it's asking whether which option, because what happens when you use this data sets and this adapters, right? And the visual designer is when you write a SQL, basically it gets wrapped in a method. So that SQL now it will get embedded inside a method. So I have to just give a method name. So easy, right? And your DAO will not touch the SQL. Your DAO will just call this method what you are giving here now, right? So there are two options. I will select the second one, right? So look at our previous video of explaining what these two options. So in this I will say get data. So what is this data? So I will say get user by, let us say, I can give any name. So I'll say username and password, right? Because that's meaningful. Get user by username. So I will click next. So this is the method name getting generated. So it's wrapping and it's creating the classes, right? So it and it generates a select SQL and the getters, right? Whatever get method. Click finish, right? So what it does now is it will generate some code and it will add a method and it will wrap that SQL. So I have to make sure that I build the project, right? So once I build the project, very important, you have to build it, then you should be able to go into your adapter, right? So adapter, so in the adapter you should now see this method. So if I see, it's here, my friends, right? So see, get user. So if I click on this method on the adapter, you can see that method is generated, right? And you don't worry, now inside this it will run that SQL and give you a result. Either if it's correct username and password, it gives a one row. If it's wrong, it returns null. So then in this data table, it will contain that. So if you receive that one row, if username and password is correct, in this data table you will have that. But if its username or password is wrong, this data table will be empty. But now the idea is you are getting a data table, tab user data table. So this all comes auto generated, right? And then they will inherit the standard classes. But you have to keep that in mind. So what your DAO will have to do now is just call this method from the table user, tab user table adapter. That is a theory, my friends. That is a theory. So in your DAO, you will create an object of that table adapter. What's the name of it? Tab user table. It's auto generated. So tab user table adapter. So you create an object of that, right? This is the theory, right? Object. So you are creating object of the adapter, right? Tab user table adapter, right? And now on this, you can call that method which you generate now. What? Get. Can you remember? Get user by username. And this is the method you created here, right? Just now, get user by username. So that method is what I'm calling here, right? That is the method I'm calling here. Get username, user by username. But remember that you have to get the pass the username and password. So it's obvious that you are getting it. So from the logic class, if you remember, in the logic class you are getting. So this username and password will now have to pass to the DAO. The logic class will have to pass it to the DAO, right? So when you say get user by username and password, you have to tell the username and the password. So which is what you are going to pass here, right? So you're going to pass the username and the password. Awesome, guys, awesome. And then remember, this method returns. What does it returns? I'm going to show it to you back, right? So this method returns, if you look here, it returns user dataset dot tab user table adapter. So you have to store that in this type of a variable. So what is this user dataset dot tab user table adapter is, you remember there's another class generated called user dataset. Inside that, see tab user data table. So it's there. So what I have to do in my DAO is I have to store the return value of this method into that, because it's returning that. So I'll give some meaningful name called obj tab user data table. Awesome, guys, we are progressing really well. Just few more things to be done, and you will see it's in action. It's in action, right? You'll be happy. Just wait till that. Okay, I got the user table, right? So now I understand what's happening. So now it's to put the strings together, right? So let's, then we have to look from the beginning, right? So now I have the skeleton structure generated. So what will happen? So put any image here if you want. I just put an image, right? Just put whatever you like, right? So in the login, now the login is in the view, and the controller classes are in the controller, and the DAO and the logic is in the model. So as you are aware, the view will not connect to the model, right? We will connect to the controller. So look at lesson 5a on this series for you to understand that. So what you have to do is the view should get connected to the controller. So I will have to right click on the view and say add reference. That's how you do it, right? We have done this earlier. Look at our previous videos. And then what do you want? Controller, right? So just say okay. And then what does the controller wants? Controller wants the model. So right click, add reference, and just say that the controller wants the model. Awesome, guys, awesome. So once you add these references, I prefer to rebuild, right? So build the solution, right, and see whether there are any errors. No errors. Wonderful. So now then the form login. So now from the login I have to connect to the user controller, right? So first of all I have to import that namespace of user controller. Where is if you click on one of your classes, you will see that is the namespace is controller, right? So what you have to do on the form is you have to say using the namespace controller. So you have to say using controller, right? Okay, then inside the login button click, right? So inside the login button click, right, you will have to create an object of user controller, that the controller class in the controller project, right? User controller, right? So user controller implementation obj, then user controller implementation, right? So you are connecting the classes now, right? So the view is now connecting to the controller. But one more important thing, friends, when you have a class and an interface, when the class is implementing the interface, the best practice is when you create an object, you don't store the object in the class, you store it in the interface. So if you can't understand why it is, look at our lesson on interfaces on this channel. So what I do is I store the reference in the parent interface type, right? Why? You have to look at our video on interface if you want to know why it is. So obj user control implementation, right? User control implementation. So now on this I can call the method, right? What's a method? So I want to tell my controller to help me validate the user login. Then I have to pass the username and the password. So I'm in the form, right? So the form can access the two text boxes, right? What are the names? This should be text box 1 and text box 2, right? So what I'm going to do is I know the default names are text box 1 and text box 2. So text box 1 dot text, right? And then text box 2 dot text, right? Okay guys, right? Text box 1 and 2, right? So right, and so it's now it will call the validate user login method, right? So then I had to look at it. So what I had to do from the validate login in the control is I'll have to connect to the model. So